So I'd say a lot of us, I know myself, like we look back on our coaching or leadership journey and we might cringe. Like we cringe at some of the ways that we did things. In many ways, it's probably just best that we laugh at ourselves for some of the crazy things we used to say or do, or the time we wasted with one methodology or one approach. And yet in another way, there's actually a lot to celebrate. Like if you or I look back at our journey and think, wow, I can't believe I used to do this or that, then that means that there has likely been growth. If you have grown as a leader, you should be able to look back on your journey and think, wow, I've grown a lot. I don't do things the way that I used to do them. Still, just because we have changed and evolved as a coach doesn't mean we were a bad coach or an idiot and that we should be ashamed of our former coach or leader self. The reality is we start where we start. We start by coaching the way that we were coached. We parent the way that we were parent. We lead the way that we were led. We are all doing the best we can with what we know. And if we are still in leadership today, there is a strong chance, a very strong chance that even though the way we used to do things were not maybe the most effective or the best way of doing things, they still work to an extent. We still won games, we still had good relationships with athletes, and we still made a difference in their lives. That former way of coaching, leading, and living, it worked. That former self worked for a while, and then it was time to evolve. I hope I look back on myself in 10 years, even 5 years, and that I cringe or laugh a little at the way that I am currently doing things. Because I hope to God that in 5 to 10 years that I have found new, exciting, and better ways to coach, to lead, and to live. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined by one of my co-hosts today, Nate Sanderson. Betsy had some flight delays and missed the recording, sadly. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this and every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC weekly newsletter. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. All right, folks. Nate and I are here. Betsy has been delayed, and she missed our podcast recording today because she was caught on a plane coming back from some of her work travels. Meanwhile, I'm in Ireland here, and it's 76 degrees, which might seem like a comfortable day for most people in the world, but for the Irish, everyone's melting here, and everyone's going crazy and can't wait to get outside. So we said we'd do something a little bit different today. We're just going to have a fun conversation, just kind of going back over our journeys as coaches and some of our successes and our flops, our failures, and share a little bit about ourselves. So Nate, I'll kick it off today. Thinking back, one of your biggest successes, favorite moment, favorite memory in coaching. What comes up for you first?
Well, for me, it's probably our team in 2015, 10 years ago, was the first team that we took to a state tournament and kind of rode a wave all the way to the state championship game. And it was a really fun team to be part of, simply because we kind of came out of nowhere. We weren't ranked in the top 10 going into the postseason, weren't picked to come out of our region. And, we just kind of caught lightning in a bottle, and we're playing really well at the end of the year. Won a lot of really close games, which was fun too. And then, yeah, took it all the way to the state title game, where we lost on a shot at the right at the end of the game there. But yeah, it was just, for the first time, it was like a trip into Wonderland. We had never been there before. I had friends who had gone before, and I had tried to learn as much as I could from them. But man, experiencing that for the first time, not carrying the weight of expectation, and really just trying to enjoy the moments, and as long as we were still alive as a team, was that was really special year for us.
I feel like people always talk about the years rising to the top, or like the best years. Like Gino always talks about like the first year at UConn, when they were like the second worst team in the conference, was like his favorite year of coaching.
Well, I think there's something to that. When there isn't the pressure in the following years, we'd bring back a lot of our core, and we'd be preseason number one. And, it was still great. And we won state titles after that, finishing that last game. And those are amazing in their own right. But I think there is something to the build, right? And there is something to, I think, the accomplishment the first time, even recently, you know, at Mount Vernon in my first year there, like winning for the first time after the team had just won one game the year before, beating a ranked team for the first time, beating our rivalry for the first time. You know, there's kind of those milestones as you're building a program, you're working your way up the mountain, that the first time that you do them, it's so exciting, you know. And then 2, 3 years later, when you're expected to do that every time, it just feels different. And so that was definitely something that we enjoyed that season for sure.
Yeah, I think back, like, I don't know if you do you ever remember do you remember your first game you ever coached? Like, the very first game?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I was the interim coach, so the coach prior to me had been asked to step away. And this was middle of January of, you know, my very first year in coaching at all. And yeah, we got destroyed by a good Highland team that night at home. And I that's about all I remember. I have no idea what's going on. Never been a head coach, hadn't been a coach prior to that. And so yeah, just really started from a place of cluelessness completely 23 years ago, whatever it was.
I think my first game might be the game I remember maybe the most. 2007? Limerick, Ireland. I I had interviewed for this. I say interviewed, like, had the job before I showed up. I just showed up to meet the head of the basketball club there, and I showed up in a shirt and tie, and they were like laughing. They're like, "What's? Why would you wear a shirt and tie? Like, I mean, we're going to be playing in gyms where there's nobody there to watch, and parents don't even show up. I mean, just basketball was, especially where we were, like, kind of, people didn't really take it that seriously, but I took it seriously. So, like, first game, interview, show up, shirt and tie, and then first game I coached, I'd actually gotten the job as like an under 14s coach and then an under 16s coach, but the under 18s coach, he didn't couldn't be at the first game, and it was actually a cup game, and so it was a big kind of, it was supposed to be a big deal. And it was, I still remember where it was, in Universal or Limerick Basketball Arena, or was basketball arena, just gym, big gym. And I had shirt and tie on and my NIT championship ring that I got playing for South Carolina in 2005. And, like, I looked well out of place, because the other coaches at best wearing a matching tracksuit, top and bottoms, but probably not. And I was up and down the sideline, stamping my foot, and I was mixing up defenses. I'm sure we would have box and one, triangle and two, and man to man, and I was just throwing everything there, and, like, I was a wild man. And looking back on it, I mean, I kind of laugh at it because I'm like a bit silly when I think about it, but definitely was, like, I feel like my early success in coaching, even though I would say it's highly ineffective coaching in many ways, I just brought an absolute ton of, like, passion and energy. And I think that kind of became the catalyst for, helping to create something special where we were in that club.
You know, as you're telling that story there, thinking back to the early years, I remember it took me probably a couple of years. Well, first of all, again, I knew nothing, so like I didn't even know to record the games, you know, or watch film early on. I didn't know what a film exchange, what, like, I didn't know any of that stuff. My first few years in coaching, and I remember, like, to this day, it was probably my, I don't know, third year coaching, something like that. We were playing Pekin in a game at home at Loiza Muscatine, and the score was like tied. You know, they called a timeout with like 10 seconds left, and by that point, started watching a little bit of film, and I told them, you know, our team, here's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to run this, you know, high ball screen, whatever, and this is how we want to guard it. And it was like the first time I'd ever made a prediction about an opponent that actually happened. And they came out and ran it and scored on it. We lost the game, but it was like, you know, for me, it was like this epiphany of like, holy cow, that felt really good. You know, like knowing more about your opponent, being able to start to predict things and stuff like that. And that was a first for me. And that was probably my third year in coaching before I ever even got to that point.
Yeah, I think it's like the first, that first, like you said, first state championship game. I never got that experience. Don't know if we had too many seasons where we were expected to be the very best in the state, or definitely best in the region and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the first really stick with you. They definitely stick with me more than, sometimes things can just start to just stream together. And but I think like doing the first really well, like I think it probably tells us a lot about like ourselves. I think, you know, that passion, that fire, that energy, that work ethic, I think that's something that maybe I in this coaching journey lost a little bit of, or dampened. And yet I think a lot of times players just they do gravitate towards coaches that just give it their all, and they know that they're working their absolute ass off to help them be successful. I think that means a lot. I think when athletes see that.
Yeah, I think another thing that athletes have really appreciated about our approach over the years, even the years when I had no idea what was going on, is just a willingness to try something different because it might be better. Whether that was a different way of practicing or a different way of approaching an offense or defense or teaching or what we're doing in the off season. Like we've always been motivated to try and find something new. Now of course everybody talks about the 1% edge here and there, but like I think your players look at that and say, coach is never satisfied. He's always trying to find better ways, different ways to be able to do things that are going to be more effective or more fun or more um, you know engaging or whatever it might be. You might be culturally or it might be on the floor, but I think players in the same way that they appreciate that effort, that you talked about, they also appreciate when they see us trying to grow and experiment. And goodness, there's a number of times I would say to our team, like, hey, we're going to try this. We might never do it again, but we're going to see how it goes. And here's why. And a lot of times it works and sometimes it doesn't. But, again, there's an appreciation that we're always trying to make things better for them and for the team.
There's like kind of like a boldness in all of it, because I think I can resonate with that, because there's sometimes trying to do something that nobody else is doing, or they haven't never seen before, or we have never even tried before. To your point of like, it could be better. I think of when I was coaching in my third year in Limerick, I had the idea of like, well, nobody's taking kids out of Ireland to go play basketball in America. I have, obviously from the States, from South Carolina. I was like, why don't I bring my team? And now when I think about it, it's actually outrageous, because I was 22 at the time. My assistant coach was 22 at the time. And these players are like 16 and 17. And somehow these parents like trusted us to take their sons, on these airplanes. But I was like, there's a bit of naivety, like, like just being kind of naive and just being like, yeah, like, but that was kind of how I did everything, was just like, what would be the best thing we could possibly do? And it was outrageous to think we could do that. And yet somehow we actually did pull it off. We brought all the kids over there. I mean, we did hit disaster the first time we did the trip, when the planes well, there was a massive snowstorm in London, and we were flying through London on the way to get back. And then the airlines were like, yeah, you can't get back right away. Actually, you're going to be here for another 4 days, and we're only going to put you up in a hotel for one day. And I'm like, oh, where do we go with this team? But like those stories are things that the players still talk about today. The things that don't necessarily go to according to plan. That's one lesson from that. But really, I think it's just like being bold and just having, like a Dave Brand talks about, the compelling vision. Like just, and I think so often, like maybe we get older, or we get, things don't go well at different times, and we start to play a little bit more safe in our coaching and our leadership, and maybe don't try things that are, that different. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I think there's a naivete to being a young coach. I mean, I think back to how oblivious I was to the incredible amount of criticism that I learned later that I was getting at the Wise Muscatine where I started. I mean, parents were lobbying the superintendent and school board members at the gas station, and like there was this movement to, get rid of me and all that. And I had no idea, and this is going to be a strange tangent here, but yesterday on social media, there was some clips making the rounds from Jerome Powell, I think is his name. That's the chairman of the Federal Reserve here in the States, that sets interest rates that President Trump has been railing on to cut rates, and he refuses to do it. And he was asked about it in a press conference, and he basically just said, yeah, my only concern is employment and inflation, and I don't care about anything else. And I don't know if that's arrogance or that's just focus on this is my job and I'm not really interested in all the political nonsense that's going around. I'm just trying to keep inflation down and make sure Americans are employed. And I, as you were talking there, and I thought about that, like that's kind of how I was much more earlier in my career when, I wasn't maybe getting as much direct feedback from parents or maybe wasn't as sensitive because I was just oblivious. And so it was like, no, we're just trying to make this better and make it more fun and be a better basketball team. And that's all I was really thinking about without the distraction and the weight of maybe some of the things on periphery here that I've become much more aware of as I've gotten older.
Yeah, the obliviousness. There's almost like a like, oh, I wish we could sometimes be oblivious. And later on, like in the coaching career, when you start to get the heat, it's like, why I don't, so it doesn't even bother you because it's like once you know and once you kind of become aware, whether it's even not even just criticism, but like you start to recognize and be a little bit more self-critical. Oh, okay, that's not necessarily on the players. That's actually on me, right? Like when things didn't go well early on as a coach, I mean, I would work my tail off to fix it, but in my mind, a lot of times it's like, well, the players didn't work hard enough today, or they didn't execute enough, and then you start to become aware of actually like the way that I'm teaching is really not not out giving them much of a chance to execute. Or does that make sense? Like I think there's being naive to criticism. There's also naive to our own imperfections as a coach. That once you start to become aware of that, that can become, and it was something we talked about in the podcast. But how do you manage that, right?
And I think that's a bit of a sliding scale too. Like if I look at my career as a continuum, I would have probably started in a very similar place to you. It's like, oh, geez, we didn't score points because the players can't make shots, And it's like, we need better players. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit, whatever, right? Like you'd say things like that, right? And then, as time went on, and I think there's probably some parallel there to me becoming more aware of maybe outside opinion, then I started to go way over. I mean, almost completely the opposite end of the spectrum of, sort of this ultimate ownership, extreme ownership, right? Like that Jocko Willing talks about, which I think is great for, self improvement and self awareness. But I think that can be unhealthy at times too. When, if I only think that everything that has gone wrong is 100% my fault, like I've been in that place before too. And that's not always the healthiest as a coach either. So I do think there's some balance. I mean, players do have to put the ball in the basket, and we have to put them in the best position to be able to do that. But I think there are dangers at both ends of that extreme.
Yeah, I think I kind of come to a place of like we in both of those situations on that sliding scale. I think we're operating from the paradigm that we have more control than we actually do. You
Sure.
know, even though in the first one you're like you might be putting the blame on the players, but you still have this, oh, okay, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix them type of mentality, which you don't have that control. You're just an influencer on that. Um, when you think back on it all, is there like a embarrassing moment that you kind of maybe cringe at or laugh at? I know that's one question we often ask teams with like speed dating activity. We get pair up and like, hey, what's a funny embarrassing moment from your journey as an athlete? But like, yeah, what's a funny embarrassing moment for your journey as a coach?
Well, we've talked before. I mean, I definitely started out as a rage monster because I didn't know any better. I didn't know anything else, right? And so, I mean, there's a legendary story from my early days at L&M of, and not legendary in a good way, but we had a good team that won 16 games, and I was a school record at the time, and fun to watch. And and anyway, we played a team on the road the second time through the conference schedule that we had beaten by 50 at our place about 3 weeks before that. We just played out of our minds that game. And so we go on the road to their place, and it's a struggle. Like we're maybe up 10 at half. We end up clawing out a 19-point win, but we did not play well. We didn't have the juice, and I was really upset. And so after the game, I'm like, listen, when we get back, put your practice gear on because we're not leaving until we play better than this. And then I went out and sat I remember sitting in the cafeteria during the boys game, people just walking by like shaking their heads, it's like as words going around about and so we get back at 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever, send them to the locker room, they put their practice gear on, whatever they can find. And it was like nobody really knew what we were supposed to do at a midnight practice, one of these things that I read about in a Pat Summit book, or something. And so, we get warmed up a little bit. And I remember one of our guards, I think she was a sophomore that year, she couldn't find her practice jersey. Or it was a home, because she obviously didn't think she was going to need it on a Friday night. So she comes out with a borrowed jersey that's like an extra large, and it's down. I mean, she's not a big kid, and it goes down to her knees, and it's like tied off like with a belt at the waist or something. And she's playing in this thing. And when she comes out, everybody just starts laughing at her, and that really broke the tension, in the practice. And we really just scrimmaged for until, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes. So I felt like we were playing well, and then we're like, all right, this is who we're supposed to be, and then we got out of there or whatever. But it was completely ridiculous. I mean, I would never do anything like that again today, and I can't believe that that there wasn't a follow up to that with the administration or the parents or anything else. Like they just accepted it, I guess, and but yeah, that's one that I look back on and with a little bit of cringe.
I wonder how your players look back on that. I would be willing to bet that many of them actually might speak positively of that, not just because of the silliness, but like, oh yeah, like I think sometimes players do take when the relationship is there and they know the coach cares that they look back on those things. Go, oh yeah, that helped teach me something. It's obviously like not how you would do things or did things moving forward. It's just interesting to think about that. I think back on a couple of silly moments for me. One, distinctly remember the first 5 seconds of a halftime talk. I have no idea what I said after that, but I remember walking in. We had this young freshman that was really tall and gangly, and he could grab rebounds. And it was so silly that in the moment, like after the game, I mean, the coaches would go out for a few drinks in the bar and reminisce that they were even ripping me for it. They were like, because I walked in and I looked at this guy and I dropped down on my knees. I'm like literally on my knees, like I'm on the, like praying for this guy here. And he's kind of like still, about 2 feet taller than me. And I'm like, you're 10,000 feet tall. Why will you not grab a rebound? Would you please grab a rebound? And I'm like on my knees praying there. Like, and the guy's just like, and we laughed about that so hard. I'm just like, man, here is JP dysregulated to the max, on his hands and knees, literally bowing, begging this player to grab a rebound. And so I still can see myself, you're 10,000 feet tall. And I laugh about that. Another time was actually back in Ireland and with a player who ended up coming to my wedding because it's very close with him and his family. But I used to go to this one player's house we'd practice on a Sunday, and then I'd oftentimes go to his house, the family's house for dinner afterwards. They just were really people that looked after me. I was a young coach, still trying to pay my way through college, and they give me a good meal on a Sunday. Um, Nothing beats mother's cooking. But so here we are. This is probably a year and a half into this tradition, and me and the player get into it. I don't know. I was challenging him for not playing hard enough, and he started back talking. I get up at him, and we're in each other's faces, and he starts crying, and he walks out and says, like, "You're not invited for dinner now." Like if we still to this day laugh about that moment, and the other teammates, we like to laugh about that moment that he walked out of practice and told me I wasn't invited for dinner, and I pretty much told him like, well, you don't make that decision. Your mom does, like it was just a complete ridiculous argument between a coach and his player. I look back on it and it's pretty embarrassing for myself how I handled myself in that moment too.
I think my assistant coaches would probably make note of my absent-mindedness. When you get so focused on prep and the opponent and the game and stuff like that, and particularly at the state tournament when you have to remember to pack things. So a couple of years ago, our first trip at Mount Vernon, we're going to the semifinal game, and we get to the arena, and I'm like, asking my assistant, I'm like, hey, you grab my stuff and put it on the bus, right? And he's like, what? Like my clothes that were on the hanger that were like right next to where you were sitting. I saw you grab a hanger. Did you wear those? And he's like, those are my clothes. So my clothes were back in the closet in the hotel after we got to the arena. So we had to dispatch the bus and an assistant coach to run back and try to get my clothes to coach in before the game. I've lost countless water bottles, of course, at the state tournament. And going back to that 2015 team, we're getting ready for the state championship game that night, and you go in, you're ready to give the speech of your life, right? And keys to the game, and we talk about this is who we are, and everybody's fired up. Walk out of there, and my assistant coach goes, "Great speech, coach, but the girls would like you to zip up your fly."
Oh, I love that. That's brilliant. Um, when you think back on like maybe one of your moments that you messed up, or just an overall like a strategy that you had, like you're an employee culturally, within the team that just backfired or fell, completely short of what you achieved. Is there anyone that sticks out to you that if you could like, oh man, if I could go back, I would 100% totally have abandoned that strategy or done something completely different?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, right? When we look back and with what we know today, compared to what we knew then. I mean, I think of again another episode from when I was at Louisa Muscatine. We had a kid that short story where essentially like we had to build out our strength training program, right? So we didn't have something that everybody did. We didn't have a class or anything like that. So I put a lot of time into doing something for our team that would fit our weight room. Well, we didn't have anything to really work on like vertical pulls. And so I had this idea of like, well, we could use the squat rack and put the bar across the top and use that as our pull up bar, or whatever. And so I had gone through the weight routine and tried everything out. And like, this seemed to make sense to me. Well, we get in there, and this kid was a swimmer. So her lats are like as big as my thighs. Right. And so she goes in to do pull ups the first set of the year, and the bar comes off, and so she brings herself up, the bar comes off, she falls backwards, tries to catch herself, and breaks her wrist. And
Oh,
so, like, she was senior captain, 4 year starter. And here I had put her in this situation that wasn't safe because we didn't anchor the bar. And now, like, I've got to call her parents, but we didn't know what happened at the time, like how bad it was. It just hurt. So we had her try to practice through it, do what you can, right? Like
oh,
it wasn't like a bone
jeez.
was sticking out of her arm or anything. She just kept complaining of it, hurting at different angles or whatever. So she goes home that night, they get x-rayed, and and mom calls and she's really angry. We didn't call and didn't tell her what happened, and now it's broken and she's gonna be out. And so that was like just really poorly handled on all kinds of different fronts. I do think on the backside of it, though, probably a week later, well, it was the next weekend, um, I just felt so convicted about the whole thing, and I had met with mom, and we kind of cleared the air, and they ended up becoming one of the most supportive families that we've ever had in my career. Um, but I asked her if I could ask mom if I could come over and see, fish the next morning, and so I went over and I brought her a flower and wrote her a letter and just said, "I'm really sorry, and here's all the ways that I screwed that up. And we really care about you, and you still have a lot to bring to our team," and that kind of thing, and just kind of left it with her. And
Mm.
that completely changed, her outcome for the rest of that senior season. And with totally changed obviously their parents' perspective of me and stuff as well. So it was a huge screw up, but I think in the humility that followed, we handled it the right way, and we still have allies for life with that family. So
Yeah, I think back to, gosh, the failures and mistakes. Like, you speak of injuries. This is so I fractured C5, C6. I used to play like semi-professional American football in Ireland. Right? Total random fact about myself there. Won 3 national titles. They call them the Shamrock Bowl. And it's still a strong competitive league. I think it's even more competitive than it used to be. First 2 years I played quarterback, then I played defensive back, receiver, and I was going into my 4th season. And I fractured C5, C6 on a tackle. Really poor tackling technique. They don't teach that well in Ireland. Anyways, this happens, but I didn't realize I fractured C5, C6, and that was on a Saturday. Well, the Sunday we're playing in a game, I'm coaching a basketball game, and I showed up. Like, I'm sitting on the sideline and I'm pale as a ghost, and like I'm in so much excruciating pain. Um, the paramedics on the Saturday were like, "Oh, I think it's just a strain. This is Irish healthcare back in 2008." So, anyways, I am there sitting on the sideline. But that would just show you, like, all right, first off, how intense I took things. Like, I would never miss something. And so I think about like where I screwed up is actually, so fast forward, I'm coaching in Tennessee, and I take off-season basketball so seriously. It's like, if we're gonna have any success, we must have great off seasons. And I remember having like a family vacation once, and I'm in New Jersey, and to make it even back for a summer practice, which was, let's say, like 3 o'clock, I leave at like 2 in the morning, and I drive 11 hours. And I still am proud of this. I had an old Honda Accord with a big, like 17-gallon tank. And so I was able to make it all the way from New Jersey, driving 11 and a half hours to Chattanooga, Tennessee on only 2 tanks of gas. And so I only stopped once to go to the bathroom once. And I probably had to go to the bathroom the last 4 hours, but I was like, I must make it to off-season practice on time. I must make it to this open gym. But I just look back of like whatever about how poorly my intensity of off-season and just like trying to force it and force this, commitment level down upon kids instead of creating an environment where it could grow and it was fun to be there. It was so controlling, as poorly as that had for the culture. It just honestly, I mean, one of the beautiful things about being a high school teacher is you get your summers off, and here I am wearing myself out in the off season with this, just hyper obsession with how I have to make my players get better in the off season instead of just creating an environment where they can make choices and they can choose their level of commitment that aligns with their goals and coaching them through that. And so, yeah, I think that looking back on it, there's probably a bit of a regret of just, man, the missed opportunities to be with family and friends in the off season to recharge that you just don't take so often because you're so focused on what it takes to be successful. All right, let's do this to get out the door here, Nate. Any question you can ask me about my coaching journey, just as we've been talking about that. Like, is there anything that's come up for you that you just are curious on?
Well, I think one thing that I've been spending some time reflecting on a little bit are just my own blind spots that I had in coaching. And when you think back to your career, even as you've evolved, over the 15 years, like where there's still blind spots maybe now that you look back on and say, man, I just didn't get that about me. I just didn't understand myself well enough to be able to show up better, perform better for my team when I was in coaching.
Like what's the big blind spot that maybe just that held me back? Yeah, that's a great question, Nate. I think this is what's coming up for me, and I don't know if this is actually the right answer, the correct answer, and there might be something ironic in that. But I oftentimes was, or always was, obsessed with finding out what is the best way, right? Like the way that I have to do this. And I was like, and then when I had made that decision, then I would be so fully committed to that. And that was the way it had to be until it stopped working or never worked. Right. Like I had this just every year constantly trying to just then reset, go, okay, now I have to find the new best way. Right. And I think there's a lot of like not necessarily best ways. You're looking for better ways. You're looking for more evolution, and tweaking and refining in coaching. But I was so quick to just kind of jump ship in my coaching from, okay, here we go. This is one way we're going to play the game, to this is one way I'm going to coach, and this is how I'm going to approach culture. And I think I was just a little bit more scattered. And I think that's so much based upon like my curiosity, desire for learning. I expose myself to a lot of different ideas, and then I just become scatterbrained. I don't have some consistency. And I think that the blind spot and all that is I just never had a sense of really who I was. Or I didn't really get there until maybe 2016. And then I started to really go, okay, this is who I am. This is what I value. These are my principles. And then from there, there's there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just operating from that. This team needs that. This team needs that. This context needs that. But I was blind to just really what was most important to me, to my principles, to my values, and never really figured out who I was as a coach for the first 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's something that all coaches can relate to, especially as we look back over the maybe first half of our career as we're growing. I mean, we're a product of how we were coached, how we were parented, maybe even how we were taught in the classroom, right? And that becomes our model for what we do. And then we go to a clinic and we're like, oh man, this offense or this, team building thing or this, this defense, right? And so then we throw all that stuff in the next year. And like you said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it works on accident, and it's in spite of you, but right. And then the next year we come up with all these other ideas, and it really takes time, I think, to figure out what are our principles of play, what are our principles of culture, what are the non-negotiables that are true for me that might not be true for you, but I can't coach unless this or this, are the realities in our program or our approach. And so yeah, I think a lot of us can probably relate to that in some way or another, and it's an ongoing thing, right? Like even when we've had success, we found things that work, or I look back at my last few years and think I feel really good about 95% of what we're doing because it's evolved so much over time. um, but still am always open, and as you said before, and looking for new ways to fit. But it's rather than new things to do, it's more better ways of doing what we believe in, if that makes sense. And I think it just takes time to get there, and some coaches never make it because they're not as self-reflective or self-aware as what even you demonstrated there in your answer to that question. So
Yeah, it's funny because as I was answering that, I kind of worked worked to that conclusion. I wasn't even there at the beginning. Here's my question for you. Get us out the door. The player that you hear the most from, because I'm thinking back to one of my players that you know I just met the other night with my wife. We were out for dinner, and he went to Paraguay with me this on an impact trip with Team Up this year. So like the player you talked the most, what is the reason behind that? Like what's been so fundamental to that relationship that all the years later, or however many years later, that they're still wanting to have that connection, that relationship?
mm, that's an interesting question. I actually asked this question to an athletic department that I was working with a couple of months ago, trying to get them to think about how is it that these relationships happen that are so impactful, because they don't always happen, right, with all your athletes. And one of the common threads that came out of that conversation was there was something that happened while I was coaching that player in that person's life. So when I think back to more broadly, the players that I have the closest relationships, that have endured now into their 30s, we're still in contact and get coffee a couple times a year, whatever. It's they had a significant surgery when they were in high school, and our family just kept checking in on them. We were there for them, or dad went into rehab, or dad left the scene, and there's a divorce situation, or whatever, right? But and those are sort of extreme, sort of tragic kinds of situations, a loss in the family or something like that. But I do think in those moments, like that's where care really lands and matters. Like when I think of a player that lost, their grandma that she was really, really close to, and came to everything, and I knew, a little bit, and when she passed away, just how significant that was for the family. And we were just there, not in a great way, when like we spoke at the funeral or anything like that, but she knew we were there, and so I think that in a lot of ways there, those gateways really provided opportunities for a depth of relationship that is uncommon. And because of that, because we walked with them through that, like that has just continued now to this day, 10, 15, 20 years later. um, a lot of the seeds of those continuing relationships started when something went wrong, and we were there.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool. I think the way I think it probably I would have answered it similar. I think it's about the players. They needed us in a way that other athletes didn't, and then we showed up. And I say step one, they need us because not every athlete needs the mentorship that the other ones do. Like, yeah, we all can be positive role models and leaders to everyone, right? But certain athletes just have a greater need, whether it's absent parent or, like you said, life struggles, different things like that. And so I look back at the ones that I still hear from. It's they had a need, and I showed up. And then the sad thing is to think about there was a need with a lot of them, and I didn't show up.
Mm.
I was a little too focused on winning, or I was too focused on these other players, or and that one makes you reflect, right? But yeah, this was fun. Thanks for sharing, Nate.
You bet.
All right, that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed this special edition of the Coaching Culture Podcast. In the meantime, you can accelerate your growth as a coach and a leader by checking out our online courses and my books, The Culture System and the Coach's Guide to Sports Parents. You can do that at tocculture.com.